Spring's finally sprung with a whole new load of anime blasting all over our faces like a fresh-faced actor working hard for their first role. Yeah, I don't discriminate. But honestly, I'll take anything to wash the awful taste of winter out of my mouth at this point. And I'm saying that knowing full well the euphemism I just used. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I had to pick shows. So I relied on my usual method, slipping show names onto Putin's desk as strategic targets, and whichever he was actually dumb enough to go after were my winners. What can I say? He's a fucking idiot. Well, thanks to him, I've got a hell of a roster. Aharen-san wa Hakarenai throws personal boundaries out the window in this high school comedy. Because Villainous got 2 seasons, Otome game Sekai wa Mabni Kibishii Sekai desu tries to muscle in on its turf with a guy being reincarnated into a background role instead of a main character. Healer Girl asks what if the power of song could actually cure cancer, instead of just causing it. Yuusha Yamemasu is when the hero isn't welcome back and decides to become the next demon lord instead. Tomodachi game hits us with some twisted views of friendship. Silver Link is back for their god knows how many times overpowered protagonist in a fantasy world with Shijou Saikyou no Daimaou, Murabito ni Tensei suru. Dogo Kobo breaks out of their slice of life wheelhouse with a slice of life fantasy show about selling property after the Demon Lord's defeat with RPG Fudousan. Shield Hero Season 2 is finally here, so expect some more edgy loner shit. Hey, Komi-san is back as well, giving us more awkwardness mistaken as swagger. I'm drowning in Season 2s again with Machikado Mazoku, where I can only hope that Shamiko finally confesses her love for Momo. What happens when the good guy and bad guy hook up? Koiwa wa Sekai Seifuku no Atode answers that question. Since the anime industry officially ran out of ideas ages ago, Kaguya-sama Season 3 is here to pad out that lineup. Kawaii dake janai Shikimori-san is about a girlfriend who can also kick some ass. Resonating with anyone who's played an MMO, Kono Healer Mendokusai is about a shitty healer who blames the tank for everything. I guess this is my resignation. Bookworm Season 3 is here, and officially a third of this season isn't even new. And lastly, Summertime Render is a supernatural show about returning home after a friend's funeral. Well, I've got a hell of a lineup this season, so let's get into it. Kicking things off with Aharen-san wa Hakarenai. This is a high school comedy about a quiet girl who tends to get overly attached, and her neighbor in class, who's the typical slice-of-life protag these days of a loser who wants to gain some friends. It, doesn't go super well, until suddenly it does. You know, I feel like I've seen this a million times already, and probably done better. But when you have a stoic main dude who's about as emotionally expressive as a plank of wood, that's actually the joke, not a criticism. Matched up against a silent kudere type, the awkward silence and uncertainty of the situations that arise speaks volumes for the comedy. And there being not just a shy person, but 2 so terminally bad at communication it leads to a slew of misunderstandings that spur the humor naturally, I don't think that's an angle we've seen before. Now, I wouldn't say this is a slice of life for everyone, but if your brand of humor tends more towards basking in awkward silence, this is gonna be more your pace. Aside from that, it certainly has some cute moments that at least keep the series from feeling one note. From an animation standpoint, it's a bit more on the bland side, with crisp line work, polished models, and a plain presentation that doesn't really try to be flashy or add much in terms of visual weight to scenes through framing, though it's completely passable. I'd say give this a watch, especially if you're into slice-of-life comedy. Time for my daily dose of isekai, with Otome game Sekai wa Mabni Kibishii Sekai desu, about a guy reincarnated into an Otome game world, but instead of as the protagonist, a main love interest, or, heaven forbid, the villain, he's a background character who fights to change his unlucky fate by overturning the matriarchy and all the good-looking guys so he can live peacefully. Oh no, how did this harem tag get in here? So yeah, a jaded main character stuck living in a game he actually hated after regaining his memories. I think why this works is it successfully sets up a shitty premise for a character in the audience to hate, essentially turning the isekai world itself into the villain. And that's somewhat different. Like, sure, he has knowledge of the game's world and events, but instead of using that to dominate it, he just wants to avoid the conflicts and live a peaceful life, or tries to at least, until his hand is forced and he ends up fighting for survival anyway. The animation here isn't particularly great. It's pretty standard animation for an isekai series, more so than many of the rounded, more self-aware sort of series as of late that barely detail their characters. It's at least not ugly, and I'll take it at this point. Yeah, I don't hate this, so we'll see where it ends up. Check it out if you're looking for a revenge isekai against the world itself. Next up is an I swear I wish I was making this up sort of series with Healer Girl. So in a world where medicine is split among 3 philosophies, we have Western, Eastern, and, music? Because apparently all it takes is a generic pop song to cure cancer in this world. So while the premise for this series is so absurd, it's bordering on stupid, it's handled well from an artistic and direction standpoint. The first moments of this series introduce that music heals, it's interestingly presented, and gives us a feel for what to expect from this franchise going forward. Now that doesn't change how cringy it is, making me feel like a bystander stuck in a musical. Like seeing a girl walk up while singing as she shoves herself and an impromptu idol act at some random child on the street to heal his injury instantly. Literally, why have any other kind of music if someone singing can heal an injury like that in a few seconds without leaving so much as a scar? I'm sorry, what? Oh, and recordings of songs work too? Not to mention the core cast is suffering from some serious cases of main character-itis. Yeah, you know, with their designs not really fitting the setting super well. I at least like the animation for attempting to present itself in a visually interesting way with its choice of camera shots, how it uses music and its flow for dialogue, and even some of the more technically impressive aspects of the singing are all well executed. However, while this series has its moments, and yeah, I'm offering some pretty harsh criticism here that this series is kinda cringe, I'd say that if you can look past all that, it's not a terrible music anime. Let's look at Yuusha Yamemasu, where after the hero wins, he realizes society is pretty shitty to the guy who just beat the Demon Lord's ass, and considers him just as dangerous. Also doesn't really help that he's not just powerful, but bought into his own hype. The dude thought his traveling companions were worthless, and is pretty damn tactless by rubbing his superiority in everyone's faces. So he goes to look for work where he knows the most people, the army of the Demon Lord he just beat, and become her #1 servant. Too bad she's just not accepting him as, you know, he's the asshole who just kicked her ass and destroyed her army, not really looking for his help. So yeah, this is a comedy. Expect jokes poking fun at the all too familiar fantasy tropes anime is known for these days. And just to get this out of the way, it's not particularly funny, as the dude basically just uses some pretty straightforward logic to beat his enemies efficiently. And that's pretty much the joke, he isn't going by the genre's rules. But hey, it wasn't tedious to watch. I feel like the humor here might develop more once the guy is actually forced to make friends. If it doesn't grow stale from repeating the same punchlines, the animation isn't really much to write home about, as it's pretty standard stuff. Despite those flashbacks to the fights the guy had with the Demon Lord and generals he's trying to convince to hire him, it's pretty plainly animated. Nothing really stood out to me here in that department besides competent shot composition and editing for a pretty bog standard premise. I don't really think this is great, but it has enough potential to be worth sticking it out for a more straightforward parody. Because I'm a sucker for psychological mystery shows, Tomodachi Game had me interested with its pitch of a group of friends pitted against one another in a game of life or death. So what starts off as an innocent class trip with a group of close friends comes to an abrupt halt when the funds for said trip are stolen, so they're suspected by their class, and ends up with them getting kidnapped Saw style, and forced to play a game against one another to repay that debt, while each takes on a portion of the total, so it helps their friends out without knowing who. A series that's looking to explore friendship, trust, and the depths of humanity in a way that pushes the cast organically. I'm interested in the mystery of not just who stole the cash from class, but how they got the characters wrapped up into this game, and exactly what they're all hiding. So yeah, the hook here is pretty strong. It's also nice for a genre that tends to put a big focus on brains, to have a main character not fall into the typical genius tropes for anime. For animation, however, it's pretty stiff. I'll say it has ambition. I think they're at least trying to do the most with their budget, but in the end it's a pretty by-the-numbers production, where they even animated one character entirely in CG, for some reason. Probably because he's wearing stripes and moves around a ton, so redrawing those lines is gonna be annoying. That's pretty lazy. A strong hook is fine, and while I'll give it that, whether this can stick its landing is yet to be seen. Many psychological game sort of anime fall apart at the halfway point, so I'll stick this one out and see if it can keep me guessing and invested. Shinjo Saikyou no Daimaou Murabito e ni Tensei Suru comes in next, with yet more incredibly powerful protagonists in a fantasy world antics that have become about as commonplace as isekai these days. So history's strongest demon lord got sick of being too damn successful and decides to reincarnate after a while, skip ahead, and he's born into a future where magic isn't as great as it once was. The catch here is, the guy's reborn to some nobodies in a country town, so he can have a normal life with friends and all. But he's about as socially awkward as your typical otaku, and his incredible talent keeps rearing its ugly head, making people notice him. thus dashing his dreams of ever becoming a normal guy. So he gets himself a childhood friend waifu, enrolls in magic school, and thus our typical fantasy story begins. You know, I can't even say I hate this stuff, because it's become so pervasive in the medium, it's like complaining about high school comedies or harem shows at this point. Did at least a few jokes stand out to me? Not particularly, as the first episode is the guy chasing around his soon-to-be childhood friend trying to get her to like him. You know, while she calls him a creep because he's basically a stalker. Silver Link and Blade are behind the animation here, and it's about what you'd expect from Silver Link with their incredibly polished style and practically assembly line quality shows looking almost the exact same. Yeah, it's competent, but nothing really stands out in that aspect. Honestly, if you want a show like this, rewatch Misfit: A Demon King Academy. It's basically the same story, and at least it's more entertaining. Oh god. Fantasy worlds are pretty much the norm these days. An RPG Fudousan is about selling property in that setting. Now, does that sound similar to Dragon House Hunting from last spring? That's because it is. Instead of following a weak-ass dragon asking a demon lord for help finding a house, we have a mage who works for a real estate agency selling property. But her first job is finding her own house. And that leads into a weird mix of humor that's not exactly bad. It takes jabs at housing trends, while also using that as a vehicle to comment on fantasy and RPG tropes. Like, oh, this house is great, but you have to keep it unlocked for adventurers to come in and steal your shit because that's what people do in a game. Stuff like that. I mean, this would probably stand out more, if not for another series with a similar premise coming out less than a year ago, on top of having a similar brand of humor to that show. I guess I'm being a bit harsh. For a benefit, it's by Dogo Kobo, masters of the slice of life genre. The art and character designs are cute, the animation is simple enough and matches the style, and really the draw is the jokes with that cuteness to smooth over any dead space. Though there's a strange amount of ecchi that doesn't really seem to mesh well with the style it's going for, like just way too many panty shots on girls that look underage because they don't have a ton of definition, except for their cleavage. Thanks, series. Yeah, it really doesn't have a ton going for it, but at the same time, it has appeal to slice of life fans in it for the cute girls, especially with a Dragon Lolly mascot to draw in all the pervs. Shield Hero is back for Season 2 to show us how a loner handles being gaslighted for way too long, with wanton destruction of course. Yeah, people have been looking forward to this after the largely successful, if not fairly controversial Season 1 back in 2019. Seeing Naofumi's quest continues, he grows his new group of friends and deepens the connection with his longtime companions, as the series slowly unravels the rest of the mysteries is what I'm looking forward to. Or so I hope, if this season can deliver. The anime left off with some pretty juicy story beats, but it looks like those will have to wait, and hopefully not until Season 3 happens. The Spirit Tortoise arc is here, and kicking off with some weird monsters, and a pause to the wave timers meaning new disaster awaits Naofumi and his crew. If you're already into Shield Hero, you're already watching, but if you're sitting on the fence after Season 1 or haven't started it because of all the slave stuff, the story at least kicks off with a bang this time around. Though be forewarned, the slave stuff isn't going away, and even comes back up in the first episode of this season, and it's still pretty fucked up. Take that into consideration. Whoa, hold on. If you're here, then that means only one thing. This is a pre-planned scripted ad break. Who would ever be so cruel? Unless you're using an ad blocker. In which case, this is the point of the video where you're reminded you have one, because you're probably wondering what the hell this is all about. Moving on. Rolling on through with next seasons, we've got Komi-san back for round 2. So the socially awkward and extremely introverted girl, trying to make friends in an eccentric high school full of weirdos, and mistaken as being so unbelievably confident, she's been made the official queen of the entire class, is how this one goes. Where will Season 2 go with this premise? Well, seeing how the first season moved forward based on Komi's growth, and the absurd situations and misunderstandings that arose from those in the know about who Komi really is, versus those who still think she's a queen bitch asserting her dominance, made for a pretty varied style of humor, excellent animation, and an honestly pretty heartfelt story, as she strives to break out of her shell. Season 2 is continuing with that right out the gate, especially as a slow romance blossoms between her and her closest friend Tadano, the pretty average and forgettable guy who takes the brunt of everyone's ire for daring to approach their queen, and works as her bridge in social situations. This series has, on paper at least, always looked like a fairly average anime, but below that mundane description and slice of life tag is a ton of heart. Since I ranked this so highly from fall, I'm looking forward to the continuation to see where the characters go. I literally can't escape from the onslaught of Season 2s, and Machikado Mazoku is back to reignite my love for soft yuri anime. What can I say about this? It was one of my favorite anime back in 2019 due to its slice-of-life approach to the magical girl genre, with a core cast that's meant to be enemies actually ending up as best friends, who hang out and maintain the airs of animosity mostly out of a sense of obligation. It's a cute series about some adorable little moe blobs floundering about with some actual solid comedy poking fun at the magical girl genre, while also subverting expectations with sometimes mean-spirited and self-depreciating punchlines flying left and right. The evil demon girl is super weak, poor, and actually a relatively normal high school girl all things considered, while the magical girl is absurdly strong, saved the world already, but is pretty lonely and happy to coach her new rival. So a super serious duel for the fate of the town usually turns into a jog around the park, or maybe going shopping and hanging out. And this follow-up continues the trends I liked in the first season, of some fun characters dealing some fairly mundane situations while in denial about their friendship. For sure check this out. Of course after binging the first season, that is. As much as I like revisiting the past, let's take a look at something new, with Koiwa Sekai Seifuku no Otome. What happens when the heads of a hero organization and a villain organization fall in love? That's the premise and core gag, taking place in a Sentai universe where the color-coded heroes battle an evil group out to take over the world. Our two leads are all lovey-dovey and end up getting interrupted by their respective calls to action. I think why this works is they know who each other are and meet up at work, but their respective groups don't, so while they're eating cookies and sitting under the falling cherry blossoms like an over-the-top stereotypical couple, their comrades and henchmen are fighting in the background, cutting their elementary school level of dating short when they check in on them, and then they have to play at fighting. Plus how immature their views on love are just allows the seiyus to go nuts on their delivery, really leaning into the cheese and making this comedy hit even harder. It's the ultimate secret office romance, and mixed with the usual slew of Sentai silliness, ramps this up to add even more depth to a will they won't they romance. I'm digging this one so far, since it's got action and fluffy shit to make weebs of all walks swoon. As for the look, it's on the slightly better end of what it could be, where the franchise is clearly trying to put some effort into the animation to look fluid, flashy, and make use of the exaggerated designs. I think the best part is, while it's action-packed and builds romantic tension in its shot choice when it needs to, it doesn't feel as though they've stretched their budget thin here, meaning this quality should maintain through the rest of the show. So looking forward to more. I don't know what else to say at this point about Kaguya-sama. It's the third season, and both of the previous ones have been great. Taking the idea of two geniuses at a crazy pretentious school and putting them in competition to see who can get the other to fall in love with them first is a decent premise, but it goes the extra mile through intense animation for mundane competition, incredibly motivated use of the camera to showcase the characters' personalities and amp up the humor, and dabbling in different styles for whatever the series is riffing on at the moment, so it's an actual rom-com, where the humor directly relates to the relationship between the two leads as they fight for love. So what's gonna win out? Their pride or their feelings? That's a question that's been on our minds since season 1. And I don't even think it's close to getting stale, with how this series manages to stay fresh through its perspectives and mini-arcs. If you're sitting on Kaguya-sama, correct that mistake. Next up, we have one of the season's most anticipated, Kawaii dake janai Shikimori-san. So a guy loves his girlfriend a ton because she's cute, fun, and all that good stuff, but she's also pretty damn cool too, like in the typical way a girl swoons over a guy in these sort of anime, with a rougher way of speaking and being clutch at the right moments. Which, happens often, since the main dude is a massive klutz and accident prone, leading to a ton of situations where Shikimori needs to swoop in and save his ass. So, this is basically a role reversal, where the guy is the airhead and the girlfriend is always looking out for him. And while that could get old pretty fast, it works well considering it's not the sole gimmick of the series, as she also has her fair share of moments to be vulnerable and cute. It sets up this dynamic where they're both pretty infatuated with one another, which is actually a nice change of pace. Rather than seeing two people work to forge a relationship, this one's already running. And hey, it's pretty healthy too, so this whole series is about them as a couple. For animation, it's definitely not bad. The colors are vibrant, the animation is fluid, the cinematography is on point with how it frames its characters to show romantic tension in scenes. Though, I'm gonna be a bit nitpicky here, I can't really say I'm a fan of the eyes, as they almost seem blurry. No, that's just the style, they didn't do a hard edge. Why does that bother me? It shouldn't. It's an odd choice, but they're sticking with it. Dogo Kobo did an overall acceptable job here, even if this doesn't look like a Dogo Kobo show. If you're looking for something cute and fun this season, this is certainly it. I'm liking it. Alright, that's enough of the cute crap. I need something eye-rollingly bad, so let's look at Kono Healer Mendokusai. This one's, of course, a comedy show set in a fantasy world where the usual slew of shit happens. There's monsters who threaten peace and strong heroes step up to fight back. The only problem is, the titular healer, a dark elf named Carla, is unbelievably infuriating, and her companion, the knight Alvin, has to clean up her messes. Now, he's not exactly a strong guy himself, so he gets the brunt of his companion's, I want to say snark, but it's more selfish demands veiled behind a nice polite facade. That leads to a big problem. This series is one note, and it drags that note out for so long I honestly feel like I'm watching an opera. Just getting the two leads to group up together takes the entire first episode, where they belt out maybe like 5 jokes. The Seiyu for Carla doesn't really have the oomph to deliver these lines, as she calmly and politely demands the utmost respect from Alvin while failing to do her job, and not in the typical anime tsundere or high-class princess tone or whatever, but with the same delivery you'd expect from any background character in a classroom setting. Yeah, that's pretty awful. The studio behind this has some pretty impressive credits, until you realize their credits as producers, not as studios, leaving this looking more like a last-minute rush job they wanted out the door. And it shows, with a plain presentation, models that lack detail, animation that doesn't complement the humor on display by adding visual weight, and a by-the-numbers shot composition that relies on the audio component entirely. It's not even that this is bad, it's just so painfully average. But it's definitely the type of series you'd watch and totally forget about a few weeks after it's done airing. Yeah, there's better comedy anime out this season, even if you're really into the fantasy setting. I'm finally done making my way through all the continuations this time around, with the 3rd installment of Ascendance of a Bookworm. So after the Trombe extermination, mine's left to deal with the aftermath her actions left on Noble Society, finding out about a devouring child with more mana than the Archduke, and she's also not signed to a noble. All while she looks to turn printing from a novelty into a bona fide industry, by stepping up from stencil prints to an actual printing press. There's a lot to look forward to if you're into this series. As magic becomes more prevalent, Mine's goals get met, and a lot of forces are at work to wreck Mine's happy life with her family and friends. However, where this season will most likely leave off is a huge heartfelt scene that'll make you beg for more. And hey, the anime has skipped a ton from what the light novels have covered. I've been going through the books volume by volume on this channel, so go ahead and check those out if you're interested. Bookworm is a series that's consistently gotten more interesting as it's gone on, so if you're sitting on the fence about this isekai, give it a shot. It's not the typical slew of garbage this genre produces. And lastly, we've got a mystery on our hands with Summertime Render, a series about an orphan whose parents died, lived with some sisters, and one of them turns up dead too, so now he's back home and trying to solve her mysterious death, because things aren't quite adding up. Well, he would, if her ghost didn't appear and warn him to protect her sister, so clearly shit's about to go down. And down it does, with some serious Higurashi vibes, a time loop, and superstitions coming to life. It sets up an interesting hook right away, as the main character comes home for the first time, meets people he hasn't seen in 2 years, and it slowly builds that there was something up with his friend's death, leading naturally into wanting to sort it all out, as everyone's acting a bit strangely too, deepening that mystery more. It's also not undercutting grief by handling it very realistically, as it comes in waves, lingers in the background, and expertly captures that vacuum in everyone's lives. The cast are likable, easily identifiable, and luckily not defined by a single trait like tsundere or something to get on the viewer's nerves. Though, for a blemish, it's a bit distracting the amount of panty shots and fan service crammed into this series for how serious it is. The animation for this is fantastic, with really fluid movements, ambitious camera work, and a strong sense of direction that emphasizes telling the story visually. Even the first few moments tell us something is up, and make it unnatural to watch with the first-person perspective. It's handled pretty nicely. The color choice is even on point, conveying the scenic beauty of the island and summer heat, and I felt absorbed in this one from the excellent visuals. This was a strong first episode here, and I think it has a lot of potential to be something great, if it can keep up this pace. So that's it. Those are the shows I have for spring 2022. And while a lot of the lineup might be stuff we've seen before, these are actually continuations I'm excited to watch more of. The new stuff this season isn't half bad either, leaving me with a lot of good impressions. We've got some decent slice of life comedies, and a few other things to spice it up too. We'll see just how well this season does, but coming off the last, I think it'll do just fine. But for now, hey, you've made it to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and do all the other YouTube stuff to help the channel grow. You can also join my Discord with a link down in the description, and if you really want to support me, you can head on over to my Patreon and pick up some extra perks. Thanks for watching.